To get your brain to rewire after a neurologic injury, of course, requires you to do the right exercises in the right order at the right time. If you've been around here for a while, you know I talk about that in depth on this channel. But maybe more important than that is what's going on underneath the skin. In other words, what's going on neurochemically. That might be more important and maybe the missing link if some of you have kind of plateaued in your recovery, and that's what we're going to go over in today's video. If you're new to this channel, I'm Tara, a neurologic physical therapist with over 22 years of experience helping people recover after a neurologic injury. And if you're someone who wants to take your neural recovery to the next level, I've created a membership program that would be perfect for you. As a Rehab HQ Gold member, you get access to monthly webinars, monthly Q&As, where you can get your specific questions answered, as well as access to my home exercise vault that I use with my patients that I see in person. And you get access to our discussion board, where you can talk with me throughout the week, as well as other members in this community. To learn more about our membership program and to sign up, or to schedule a discovery call to see if our program is right for you, you can visit rehab-hq.com or just click on this link up in the corner. But now the main reason you all clicked on this video, we're gonna dive into a recent paper that absolutely gets me so excited to know that the scientific community is actually investing a little bit more time and energy into a topic I've been very passionate about, and that is what's going on neurochemically after a stroke and how specific nutrients might be able to influence things like chronic inflammation, oxidative stress, mitochondrial function. Don't worry, we're going to go over into what all these words mean, but how all of those things might influence recovery and actually help some of you to overcome some of the plateaus that you might currently be in. And as per usual on this channel, I am going to give a little background just to help everyone be on the same page and understand some of the terminology that I'm going to talk about when we get into the meat and potatoes of the article. And the first concept that is really helpful to understand is inflammation. Now, I'm going to make this very brief. I've made a whole video on chronic inflammation, and it's actually the pinned video on my channel, and that video is a couple of years old, and the reason it's still the pinned video is because I think that this is the most critical thing to understand prior to even figuring out what the best exercises are to do, is figuring out or understanding what's going on inside your system after a stroke. And it all starts with first understanding what is inflammation. Most of you think of inflammation, you hit yourself, you break your arm, you break your leg, it swells up. Yes, that is inflammation. And it is something that is absolutely essential to our survival. And basically that inflammation or that swelling that you see if you bump your arm or you break an arm is an immune response. Post-COVID, most of us understand what the immune system is, so I'll make this extremely brief. But the immune system responds to injuries and pathogens that enter our body. Our body will recognize that damage or that pathogen, that foreign object that's in our body. It will release some pro-inflammatory chemicals. These pro-inflammatory chemicals trigger the immune system to deploy immune cells. These immune cells come into the area, they clean up any debris, get rid of the pathogen, and if there's any damage, start the healing process, and then leave the area. That's a simplified explanation of the innate immune system, and very important, this is all triggered by pro-inflammatory chemicals that call the immune system into action. Then there's another term that many of you have probably heard, and that's low-grade systemic inflammation. And that's when these immune molecules that are meant to clean the area up and start the healing process, it's when they stick around a little bit too long after the pathogen is gone or the bone has been healed or the tissue has been healed. And when this happens, it starts to damage healthy tissues. These are immune cells that are in a specific area of the body. They can be in joints, they can be in organs, they can be in blood vessels, they can attack nerves, but it's when there's nothing there for them to attack, they linger and they start to attack healthy tissues. That's also really important when we get to stroke and stroke recovery. And again, I know some of you have heard this before, especially if you've been around for a couple of years, but just like I know how I learn, repetition is sometimes super important and really hardwiring some of these things that can be a little bit complex, but are super important to understand to help you know what your next best steps are in your neurologic recovery. Okay, so we understand inflammation, systemic inflammation. Now let's talk about free radicals. Free radicals sometimes get a bad rap, but free radicals are also pretty important when it comes to the immune system. Free radicals are just unstable atoms, meaning they have an unpaired electron. Not super important, but that's what a free radical is. And free radicals are important for one, they help to signal the immune system to respond appropriately when those immune molecules are required to help heal a specific area or get rid of a pathogen. But too much of a good thing, not necessarily a good thing, too many of these free radicals, and they start to damage healthy tissues, as well as your DNA, proteins, lipids, critical components of cell membranes, or kind of like the barrier wall around cells. So in small amounts necessary, too many free radicals cause a problem. But the good news is we have something called antioxidants, which many of you have heard of, especially if you hear about certain diets, things like that. You've heard the term antioxidants. Antioxidants help to neutralize free radicals. So that's why foods high in antioxidants are so popular when it comes to many, many diets to improve overall health. You have free radicals, you boost your antioxidants neutralize those free radicals. But when this gets out of balance and we have too many free radicals and the antioxidant system is not robust enough to neutralize them, you can develop something called oxidative stress. Many of you have heard that term as well. Oxidative stress is when you have too many free radicals and you don't have an antioxidant defense system that is robust enough to neutralize them. Oxidative stress, not a good thing. Oxidative stress has been linked to cancer, heart disease, diabetes, aging, and neurodegenerative diseases. Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's, multiple sclerosis, which is important because some of those neurodegenerative diseases is what has brought many of you into my community. But now let's talk about how we create free radicals. And the most important thing to talk about when it comes to how we generate all these free radicals is we need to talk about mitochondria. Mitochondria are simplified, the little energy producers inside of each cell. They take glucose in the presence of oxygen, very important. Glucose in the presence of oxygen, we're talking about those mitochondria, and they convert that glucose into ATP, which is the energy currency of our cells, and which is necessary for every cell function in our body. Without the ATP, cells die. That's the very important thing to remember. But a byproduct of this conversion of glucose into ATP is reactive oxygen species, ROS, which is a free radical. And in this context, the reason those free radicals are important is they are somewhat involved in timely cell death and timely mitochondrial death. So cells have a shelf life, mitochondria has a shelf life, and the reactive oxygen species are involved in making sure there's a timely cell death. So, of course, this is one instance where we would want to neutralize those free radicals. If we don't neutralize those free radicals, they start to cause problems. Mitochondria will outlive their shelf life. And when mitochondria outlive their shelf life, they're kind of like an old car driving down the road. They just produce kind of more exhaust, more of that reactive oxygen species, and damage cells. Very, very important. Okay? So now we understand inflammation, we understand how antioxidants neutralize free radicals, we understand that free radicals are not good, we understand oxidative stress and how that happens when we have an increase in free radicals and not a robust enough antioxidant system to neutralize those free radicals. We understand mitochondria and how important those are to cell survival and functioning. But now let's talk about neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are little molecules that are stored at the end of each neuron, and they help to communicate a message to an adjoining neuron. Neurotransmitters can either increase activity in that next neuron, it can decrease it, or it can just modulate that next neuron in some way. So we have excitatory neurotransmitters and we have inhibitory neurotransmitters. And again, neurotransmitters help to communicate a message throughout a neural network. Now, there's a lot we could go into in regards to that, but the only thing that I really want you to know for this video is glutamate. And glutamate in this context is a neurotransmitter, and it is an excitatory neurotransmitter. So that's all I want, really, what you need to understand as far as neurotransmitters go, as far as getting into the bulk of the paper that we're going to go over today. So glutamate is an excitatory neurotransmitter. A neurotransmitter helps to communicate a message from one neuron to the next. So now that we have like a big picture lay of the land and what's going on biochemically inside of our body at all times, let's talk about stroke and what happens after a stroke. A stroke is either a clot or a blood vessel that bursts in the brain. This causes oxygen and blood flow to be cut off to a certain area of the brain and certain neurons. This lack of blood flow and therefore lack of oxygen causes energy to be cut off. Remember, glucose in the presence of oxygen is one of our main sources of ATP for the brain. So blood flow cuts off oxygen. Oxygen will turn off the system that generates the energy that allows neurons to stay functioning or operational. This signals to the brain that there's like trauma, and that trauma activates microglia. Microglia is probably a term I should have gone over earlier, but basically microglia is the immune system of the brain. So microglia do their immune system thing, and they deploy those immune cells that we talked about earlier. Those immune cells create inflammation. What's the main way they do this? They do this by releasing pro-inflammatory molecules, or cytokines, if you want like the technical name. This kind of inherently kind of throws the brain into this chronic inflammatory state. So that low-grade chronic inflammation that I talked about earlier, just the fact that you had a stroke, so many of you have said that you have no comorbidities or you don't know why your stroke happens, just know that you had a stroke, and that in and of itself creates systemic chronic inflammation. Part of this systemic chronic inflammation breaks down or degrades something we call the blood-brain barrier. And what the blood-brain barrier is kind of like a filter that prevents certain molecules from getting into the brain. When that's degraded or broken down, you have immune cells from the body getting into the brain and just creating havoc. I don't know if this is technically true, but the way I visualize it is these molecules, because the blood-brain barrier is broken down, they get into the brain and the brain can't recognize them because normally those things are filtered out. And that is what throws the brain into this chronic inflammatory state. And again, this is all just part of having a stroke. Now, this is not all doom and gloom. Not all is lost. That doesn't mean that you're destined to be in this chronic inflamed state for the rest of your life. And that is because of this paper that we're going to go over today. So I promise you this is all very good news when we get to this newer paper that just kind of talks about ways that we might be able to use nutrients and minerals to kind of intervene in this process that just normally happens after a stroke. So you got this chronic inflammatory state in the brain. This releases an abundance of reactive oxygen species. If you think about it, there's just all these foreign molecules floating around in the brain now. And remember, I told you those free radicals, reactive oxygen species, are not only a byproduct of pro-inflammatory molecules, like they're just produced from the release of those those deployment of those pro-inflammatory molecules, but also now you have this energy deprivation in the brain because you have this oxygen that's cut off, and that also contributes more reactive oxygen species. So you've just got these reactive oxygen species just being sprayed out from these neurons that are now either dying or are dead. And that creates oxidative stress. And remember what I said earlier, and it's really, really important. Oxidative stress is linked to neurodegenerative diseases. So all of this really does matter. And when you've had a stroke, you could do everything right, but you're still at an increased risk for having like a more rapid cognitive decline or neurodegenerative conditions because of this trauma from your stroke. So again, all of this really, really does matter. You could be the healthiest person in the world before your stroke happens, but you still are susceptible to these neurodegenerative changes because of this trauma that's happened to your brain. So oxidative stress is a real problem after a stroke. And as I said earlier, this oxidative stress damages DNA, lipids, and proteins, really the main structural components of every single cell in our body. But because of this oxidative stress and these free radicals, it also impairs two of the most important processes or things that go on inside the body that are super critical to neural rewiring, and that is neurogenesis, growth of new neurons, and angiogenesis, growth of new blood vessels. Very, very important. So we don't want oxidative stress to linger. But what is the hopeful message in all of this? We know that this happens, and we know that nutritional support positively impacts all of these kind of impaired systems. Oxidative stress, chronic inflammation, mitochondrial function can be influenced in a positive way through nutrition, and is an area that hasn't really been talked about very much until this paper came out. So what are some problems or barriers to addressing these problems through nutrition after a stroke? And these are very real issues, and probably why they don't do a lot of research in this area, or they haven't, is that there's real reasons why someone cannot get proper nutrition after a stroke. You have a swallowing issue, meaning you're not on a regular diet. You're on either like a thickened liquids diet or a pureed diet, can make getting proper nutrition difficult. You might have a mobility issue that prevents you from being able to cook certain foods. You're reliant on others to provide food for you, whether that's Meals on Wheels or you're in an assisted living, you have to eat what they give you. You're in a skilled nursing facility, you have to eat what they give you. So those are real problems. One thing that they know for sure already, and why this hasn't been highlighted more, is that people that had proper nutrition before their stroke tend to have better outcomes after their stroke. And that's really, really important, and why I feel like there should be more attention given to this area. And comorbidities are linked to worse outcomes. So for example, people that have diabetes, heart disease, chronic inflammation prior to their stroke have worse outcomes. So there can be some correlation, or you can make some of a loose conclusion that people that had poorer nutrition before their stroke probably maintain that poor nutrition after their stroke. And they do know that people with these comorbid conditions, which sometimes as a result of poorer nutrition, will have problems or have not as good outcomes after their stroke. Okay, so all of this is good news, because now we're going to talk about how we can optimize our nutrients and what's going into our bodies, and dietary support to overcome some of these plateaus that you're in, and that's what we're going to go over in the next section. So now, why are nutrients so important when it comes to neural rewiring? Well, certain nutrients help with BDNF production, which is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. I didn't go into that in depth in this video, but if you check out this video right here, I go into a little bit more depth on how important that is with neurons being able to sprout new legs. So a healthy neuron being able to sprout a new leg and take over for a damaged neuron. BDNF is helpful in that process, but also nutrients can improve mitochondrial health. They can modulate that inflammatory process that we went into in depth on the first half of this video. And they can play a role in reducing a close cousin to inflammation, which is that oxidative stress. This paper is referring to this as, I guess, a new concept called neuronutrition. To me, this should have been like a foundational concept, and maybe that word's been around for a while and I just haven't heard it before or read about it. But this paper is calling it neuronutrition as kind of like a big picture concept that helps to identify dietary guidelines, I guess you would say, that can boost the antioxidant defense system, modulate neuroinflammation post-stroke, and support neural rewiring or BDNF production, or how the neurons can be repurposed to take over for damaged or non-functional neurons. And now, before we get into what those key minerals or nutrients are, I think it's really important. I want there to be no ambiguity around my opinion on this one next statement that I make, and that is there is no supplement, pill in the world that can replace dietary guidelines, meaning that, in my opinion, if you are eating a diet that's high in ultra-processed foods and you're creating inflammation, which is what ultra-processed foods do. Ultra-processed foods are designed to take natural foods that are grown in the earth or are part of nature and modifying them in some way to either increase their shelf life, make them more palatable, or make them calorie dense. And the reason for that is during times of famine, this was absolutely essential. When food was around, you would want to make it very calorie dense because you knew there'd be a time of scarcity. So all of that said, they're meant to be overconsumed because when they're around, you want to overconsume them. We are no longer in a state where food is scarce or that we are at risk for a food scarcity situation. So they are no longer valuable, right? But we still eat them because they taste good, they're highly palatable, and they trigger our dopamine system to associate certain tastes and certain textures and even certain smells with our pleasure centers in our brain. But that same system hijacks our natural satiety and hunger signals and result in us overeating and, in my opinion, eating more calories than you're burning, meaning that if you are very sedentary and you are either eating the same amount of calories you were eating before your stroke or you're eating more calories than you were eating before your stroke, you are most likely in an energy surplus, meaning you're consuming more calories than you're burning, and those calories need to be stored somewhere. A little bit gets stored in our muscle, but the majority of those calories are stored in fat cells, adipose tissue. Now, one thing we know about adipose tissue that I didn't mention earlier is that they get bigger, and when they get bigger, what they do is put pressure on surrounding cells and cause those cells to kind of go hypoxic or become oxygen deprived, and they die, and they trigger inflammation. So they trigger our immune system. Not only that, they get those extra calories get stored inside blood vessels via something that we call foam cells. Foam cells get converted into plaques that you see on the inside of blood vessels. Plaques also trigger the immune system because they're not meant to be there, right? So all these things create inflammation. So the moral of this story is we are going to go into some nutrients now, which I rarely do on this channel because I see you guys, you love your supplements. So you talk about them a lot in the comments. I kind of know who my crew is that is a huge fan of supplements. And I will tell you, if you are consuming a diet high in ultra-processed foods that are both calorie dense and highly palatable, you are most likely over-consuming calories. The other way you know is if your BMI is your body mass index. It's not a great tool for like optimizing health, but it is a good tool to at least identify those of you that might be in the obese category. If you are in that category, that adipose tissue is creating inflammation, and there is no amount of robustness in your antioxidant system that will be able to keep up with the reactive oxygen species that are being spewed out from all of these other tissues. Chronic elevated blood glucose also does this, so eating a diet that's high in refined carbohydrates, cereal, oatmeal, sugary sweets, all of that increases your blood glucose. Chronic elevated blood glucose also triggers this pro-inflammatory cytokine release. So the moral of the story is, or the long story short, is that if you have all of these other opportunities going on where you're producing all of this reactive oxygen species, this next section that we're going to go into will not be able to compete with that, and you will not get some of the benefits we're going to go through with these minerals and nutrients. The best place to get these, and we'll go into this, is through food, whole foods. But in addition to that, limiting, in my opinion, your ultra-processed foods to less than 10% of your total calories, and making sure that you are in an energy balance, meaning the number of calories that you're eating matches the number of calories that you're burning. The two tools that I love is I do love a fitness tracker, and linking a fitness tracker up with MyFitnessPal. MyFitnessPal is an app where you can track what you're eating. It will link up with your activity tracker, and it'll actually tell you exactly how many calories you should have a day, and it'll tell you when you've met that caloric goal for the day. So I think it's a great foundational step. If you have never tracked what you eat, you need to do that, because there's a good chance that you are underestimating what you're eating. This is data that you could be off by almost 50%, meaning most people, we have a very bad memory when it comes to food. If you have never gone like 2 weeks or a month of tracking your food, you absolutely need to start there. If you have a high BMI, you have diabetes, the first place that you need to start as a foundation is trying to get back into an energy balance, meaning calories you're consuming is close to the calories that you're burning. But now I'll jump off my soapbox and we'll actually get into kind of what this paper talked about, which is really the whole point of this entire video. Most of what I just went over, I have said in other videos. So for those of you that are new, it might be new information, but a lot of that I've gone over. But let's go over some of the newer information that I really don't talk a ton about on this channel, but I do think it's important for those of you who are already in a caloric and energy balance. You've already eliminated majority of the ultra-processed foods from your diet. Your weight is in range, and you want to go one step further to optimize that brain health and recovery. Well, this paper has identified some neuronutrients that are potentially extremely valuable when it comes to neuroplasticity because of the impact on inflammation, oxidative stress, and mitochondrial health. And the first one is omega-3s. Now, many of you have heard about omega-3 fatty acids. Omega-3 fatty acids help with cell signaling. Omega-3s also stimulate BDNF, that brain-derived neurotrophic factor. They're involved in modulating that inflammatory response. So super, super valuable. And they make the cell membrane more flexible. So more flexibility in a cell membrane means that it can is more permeable. Permeability is just the ease at which molecules can travel in and out of the cells. So super, super important. Sources of omega-3s are fatty fishes, flax seeds, chia seeds. I love chia seeds. I make like a chia water every day. Make sure you soak them. They are very dry and they soak up a lot of water very quickly. The good news about that is you don't have to soak them in water very long for them to fully absorb the water in the cup, but know that if you don't soak them beforehand, that's what's happening in your body, and they're drawing a lot of that water out of your body, and they can be a choking hazard. But chia water is absolutely fabulous with a little bit of lemon in there. That's a great source of omega-3s. But yeah, fatty fish is probably the best source. Polyphenols is the next kind of group of nutrients that are super, super important. Polyphenols are found in fruits and vegetables, leafy greens, and green tea. Polyphenols are extremely involved in improving our antioxidant defense system, and of course, also reducing inflammation. So leafy greens, fruits and vegetables, polyphenols. Some of the minerals that this paper, which was specifically looking at post-stroke nutrition, is zinc, magnesium, copper, and selenium. Zinc supports the superoxide defense system. The superoxide defense system neutralizes superoxide, which is extremely toxic to cells. Magnesium has some antioxidant properties, but it also enhances glutamate. Now, glutamate's like a tricky one, and I even get confused sometimes about this, but glutamate initially is overproduced like right after the trauma of the stroke, and it creates like what they call excitotoxicity. It's an excitatory neurotransmitter. It's overproduced. It creates neurons that are just too excited and they die. That's how my brain works. That's not like physiologically accurate, but it's excitatory and it's toxic early on. But glutamate is also very involved in it's a neurotransmitter. It's an excitatory neurotransmitter. So it's very involved in modulating some of those neural networks that are involved in tasks that you're trying to learn, right? So it's very, very involved in that. So in the later stages, you want a system that's optimized to produce glutamate, and magnesium is involved in glutamate production. So magnesium is another one that is on that list of recommended nutrients. And then copper and selenium are enzymes that kind of turn on the antioxidant defense system. So remember, antioxidants neutralize free radicals. They bring down oxidative stress. So copper and selenium are enzymes that kind of turn that switch on for the antioxidant defense system. So also very important. Okay, so far we've said omega-3s, polyphenols, zinc, magnesium, and copper. Now let's talk about vitamins. So vitamins A, C, and E are antioxidants. Vitamin D helps to modulate the immune system, also very important. And vitamin B helps with energy metabolism. So basically energy metabolism is that process of turning glucose into ATP. B vitamins are extremely beneficial for that. Now let's talk about ketone bodies, because I found this very, very, very interesting in the article. Many of you have heard of a ketogenic diet, and that's a diet that's high in fats and extremely low in carbohydrates. Fats and proteins, high in fats and proteins and extremely low in carbohydrates. And when you eat ketogenic diet, because of that low carbohydrate intake, your body produces ketones, and ketone bodies support mitochondrial function. Remember, those are the energy producers in the cell, and reduce oxidative damage. So in my opinion, I am not dogmatic about any diet. I believe that we can reverse most diseases in America if we eliminate ultra-processed foods. So ketogenic diet, carnivore diet, even though I'm not a huge advocate of a vegan diet because of not getting enough protein. But even a vegan diet, why do you see so many testimonies of all of these different diet and observational studies supporting all of these diets? Well, one main thing, in the Mediterranean diet, what do they all have in common? They eliminate ultra processed foods. So no, I am not an advocate of any one particular diet. I say find the diet that fits best with your lifestyle, eliminating ultra processed foods. That is my stance. I'm sticking to it. Choose the diet that's best for you because of the importance of protein for maintaining muscle mass and just for every system in our body. And I've made whole videos on this. This is not really like going to go in depth on that because I've made a video on that, but amino acids are critical for the functioning of every single cell in our body, which comes from protein. Animal proteins you get more protein per gram of food. So meaning you have to eat more food on a vegan diet to get the same amount of protein. So I just think that animal proteins, they're a higher quality diet. They're a higher quality protein, and they can't contain all of the essential amino acids that our bodies need. A plant-based protein, most plant-based proteins, you have to combine proteins to get all of the amino acids that you would get in an animal-based protein. So not super dogmatic about any one diet, but if I had to rank them, a vegan diet would probably be underneath like a ketogenic diet, Mediterranean diet, or even carnivore. Carnivore would still kind of be at the bottom because I think you need fiber, but this is not what this video is about. I'm talking big picture, general things that you can all do to improve your brain's ability to heal after a stroke. And that brings me to the final category that this paper talked about, and this paper will be linked below, is fiber and prebiotics. Fiber is absolutely essential. That's why carnivore diet is kind of close to the bottom. I do think there's some value in a carnivore diet. Carnivore diet is just an all meat diet. You don't eat anything else but animal meat, protein. One thing that I think it might be a beneficial diet for short term to get out of like a health crisis, but I don't think anyone should be on a carnivore diet long term. That's kind of a hot take. I didn't script that into this video. I just kind of said it and I'm not taking it out, but I don't think it's good long term. I definitely think you need fiber. Fiber contains short-chain fatty acids. Short-chain fatty acids feed the healthy bacteria in the gut microbiome. That's one thing that we didn't talk about in this video because this video I already knew was going to be super long, so I chose not to talk about that. But a healthy gut microbiome is absolutely critical. We need that healthy bacteria in our gut. Without it, they call that like gut dysbiosis. The walls of the gut become a little bit more permeable, and they allow things that should not be in the body to kind of, for lack of a better term, or to keep this simple, leak out, and they're toxic to the body and they create inflammation. So you want that healthy bacteria in your gut. So fiber is a critical component of that. And just for any of you who already know about this, that also goes into like the gut-brain axis. And again, we didn't talk about that in this video, but that's also extremely important for brain health, stress, things like that. So fiber, and a prebiotic. Both of those help to maintain a healthy gut and then indirectly help with inflammation. Okay, so now all of that said, I've kind of given little hints to my recommendations on where I think most people can start, and it would start with eliminating ultra-processed foods. Don't keep them in your house. Another thing that I strongly recommend, if you are someone that's trying to change your eating habits, you want to create as many barriers as possible to the foods that you know are not helping you achieve your neuro healing goals, that brain rewiring. So that said, if you have Uber Eats on your phone, this is going to be extremely harsh, but you will not accomplish your goal. If your goal is you're eating foods that you just can't stop eating and you have Uber Eats on your phone, this is just from experience. I've never once used Uber Eats because I'm just too cheap and I don't want to spend the money on paying someone to bring me my food. But I will tell you across the board, the patients that I see that have Uber Eats on their phone, you will never be able to stop eating the foods that you are over consuming that you're trying to get rid of. I just know this from like a habit standpoint. If you are trying to abstain from a suboptimal habit, you have to create as many barriers as possible between you and that habit. And I promise you, if you have Uber Eats on your phone and you have at your fingertips, do I order something healthy or do I order something that I really want because it tastes good? You're going to order the taste good food. So get Uber Eats off your phone. So at a foundation, my number one recommendation is start eliminating those ultra processed foods. My suggestion is start with the foods that you're the least emotionally attached to. Some foods we just eat out of habit, like because it's always in the break room. If that's the case, don't go into the break room when those foods are spread out, things like that. The foods that you're the least emotionally attached to, and then also make the tough decisions at the grocery store, not at your home. What I mean by that is don't buy the foods. Do not have them in your house. Now, one thing that's a little bit confusing for me, and maybe some of you can teach me something in the comments, is when people say, I'm not addicted to foods, but yet, like, I have to have these foods in my house for my grandkids or whatever, and so then I just eat them. Well, if you know they're bad for you and you eat them, that is the definition of an addiction. An addiction is knowing something's not good for you and not being able to stop that behavior. So many people tell me they don't have a food addiction, but that is a food addiction. So if you have a food addiction, do not have those foods in your house. It's no different than going to a bar and sitting at a bar all day and being an alcoholic. Right? Like if you ate all your meals at a bar and you're an alcoholic, it's going to be a lot harder not to fall off the wagon. I say that it's that serious when it comes to food, especially knowing that it could be making your health conditions worse. So ultra processed foods, layer one, get those out of your house. What that means is you will eat more whole foods and you will get most of those nutrients and the fiber and the prebiotics and everything we just talked about. You will get those foods in and you won't really need to think about it that much. And then eat protein at every meal. It's satiating. It is loaded with some of the vitamins and minerals that we just went over. Protein at every meal. And then downstream of that, get all of those things in first because that'll cover most of the minerals and nutrients that we just went over, including the omega-3 fatty acids, the vitamins, and the minerals. Once you get a handle on that, you will be so much further along on this neuroinflammation, getting that neuroinflammation under control. Downstream of that, green, leafy vegetables, bright colored fruits, in moderation when it comes to the fruits, because again, those also contain sugar, but fruits and vegetables for the polyphenols, primarily the green leafy vegetables, potentially some sort of a fermented food like sauerkraut, that helps with the gut microbiome. Kimchi, maybe, but most kimchi also has high fructose corn syrup in it, which I just learned recently when I was reading some of the labels. So high fructose corn syrup is in everything. And if you can eliminate that as much as possible, also a good thing. But again, still downstream of eliminating ultra processed foods and protein, nuts and seeds in moderation for the omega-3s and the fatty fish in moderation. Now, the downside of the nuts and seeds is they're very calorie dense. So if you are someone who is in that obese category on that BMI, you are in a calorie imbalance, meaning you're taking in more calories than you're burning. So calorie dense foods, I would eat sparingly. Nuts are a very calorie dense food. But if you're already at an optimal weight and you're not gaining weight after your stroke, definitely a good source for getting in some of those omega-3s. But that is it for this video. I know I didn't go over a lot of foods for all of the vitamins and minerals. If you want my PDF handout that I give to my members that has all of these vitamins and minerals listed with all of the foods that contain these vitamins and minerals and how much of these vitamins and minerals, click the link below and you will get that PDF handout that I give to my members. You will get that free, delivered directly to your inbox. If you're someone who wants to be part of these webinars that includes topics such as this, but also a whole range of topics that are important information for you to know to optimize your neuro recovery and really take it to the next level, as well as access to our monthly Q&As where you can get specific questions answered regarding your situation, and you get access to our discussion board, PDF handouts, and the entire exercise vault that I pull exercises from that I give to my patients that I see in person. Visit rehab-hq.com. Check out all the perks, check out our different membership levels. If you're still not sure which membership might be right for you, you can schedule a discovery call and we can help you decide which program would be best for you. But that is it for this video. I enjoyed spending time with y'all today, and I'll see you in the next video. Have a good day.